Many are worried about whether the economy will ever recover. I'm worried about whether people will ever recover. Because we were created to live in community, and it's not good for us to be alone. The physical distancing connected to the community and to the coronavirus is damaging us in unimaginable ways. Every indicator, that is anxiety, depression, drug use, alcohol use, PTSD symptoms, suicide, are all rising. One of the indicators of the damage to humanity that few are talking about is despair. In America, there is a rise in what's called deaths of despair, preventable deaths that are due to suicide, opioid, and other drug overdoses, and deaths related to poor health behaviors. The United States is the only rich country in the world where mortality rates are increasing rather than falling. This despair is connected to the meaninglessness of modern life in America. And while conservative Christianity continues to preach that everything will be all right, anyone with eyes can see that things are not going well in America. If you're an African American, bad times didn't start with the coronavirus or with the death of George Floyd. We have been fighting despair in this country for 401 years. The black church has always helped us forestall that despair, but the black church has lost a lot of its purpose and a lot of its relevance. The Canadian theologian, Dr. Douglas John Hall, has called attention to the anxiety of meaninglessness and emptiness that he believes afflict the general public of North America. His views come from how he deals with salvation history and the context in which salvation history has developed. Last time, we began to look at that meaninglessness by working our way through the book of Ecclesiastes. The book is about vanity, or about meaninglessness. Ecclesiastes 1 through 2, New American Standard. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Vanity of vanity. All is vanity. Solomon, the writer of Ecclesiastes, is saying that all of life is nothing but futility. It is marked by meaninglessness. It is marked by purposelessness and despair. Please notice with me as I read the context of what we're going to be studying tonight, the entire first 11 verses in Ecclesiastes. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Vanity of vanity, all is vanity. What advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again, blowing toward the north, then turning blowing toward the south, and then turning toward the north. The wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome, and man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see, this, it is new? Already it has existed for ages which were before us. There is no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his holy word. Where are we? All life is vanity. Life is often vain, especially when you don't know God or when you don't have a source from which you can draw meaning. This is experienced as despair and hopelessness. Life can also appear meaninglessness to those who even know God if they don't have God's perspective. This meaninglessness is pointed out by the writer here in the cycles of life. The vanity or the meaninglessness of life is illustrated in the monotonous cycles of life. Monotony does not point towards any goal or any meaning. The coronavirus and the televised death of George Floyd has contributed to that meaninglessness. In verse 4, we come to the transient nature of people as opposed to the abiding nature of earth. Job, in his burned out state, spoke of the longevity of man in Job 14:1. Man who is born of a woman is short-lived and full of turmoil. You King James Version folks, full of trouble. James says, you are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then it vanishes away. What are our few short years of life in comparison to, say, a rock? Also, we see that the cycles of generations coming and going. We see the ceaseless, restless activity of births and of deaths. We come to verse 5, and we see the cycle of the sun. It is always in a hurry to set so that it may rise again. It is always in a hurry to rise so that it may set again. This is an endless and monotonous cycle. Verse 6, the wind blows north today, but it will blow south again. The wind blows south the next day, but it will blow north again. The wind travels in a circular course. We now have meteorologists to explain to us the jet streams which are affecting our weather. But how did Solomon know about the course of these jet streams? He didn't know, but the God who was revealing these words to him did know. Verse 7, we see here the endless cycle of rivers flowing into the sea. All the rivers of the world flow into the seas, yet the seas are never full. There's another cycle here. It is the hydrologic cycle. It rains. The rainwater runs together to make streams. The streams become tributaries to larger rivers. The rivers flow into the sea. The sun evaporates the water from the sea, and that forms clouds. The clouds become full and release the water in the form of rain, and the process starts all over again. I hope y'all getting this. We're talking about the cycles of life and how monotonous they can seem to many people. Verse 8, the writer says all things are tiring. The cycles of life are tiring. Sometimes you just get tired of going to work. You just get tired of eating the same things. You just get tired of exercising. Sometimes you just get tired of reading the Bible. Sometimes, at least before now, you just get tired of going to church, of going to the supermarket, of watching children. And now think about the monotony of sheltering in place. And you have don't have the activities of going out and of making trips, of breaking up that monotony. The NIV interprets the next phrase more than one could say. All things are more tiring than one can even put into words. The eye is not satisfied with seeing. The lust of the eye is never satisfied. Lust is a green-eyed monster that never is filled. It starts with out viewing, but it ends up doing. The ear is never filled with hearing. Because of the selective listening processes that God has given to each one of us, we filter out certain sounds so that our brains will never experience an overload. Neither our ears nor our brains are ever really full. Moreover, our ears are never full of hearing because we listen at about 600 words per minute, but people talk generally only about 120 words per minute. Verse number 9, there is nothing new under the sun. There are no new styles. Styles go in cycle or in circles. They're cyclical. And so a lot of things that we think are new may have been here 50 years ago or 100 years ago. There are no new heresies. The claims to higher experience and higher knowledge by certain Christians really amounts to the special claims of the ancient Gnostics. The teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses that Jesus was not God, but merely a special man, is remarkably similar to the Ebionites of approximately AD 107. There are no new heresies. They're just ones we haven't heard of before. There are no new Christian doctrine. And while we live in an age of knowledge, most of what is being called new is merely an invention, reinvention of the wheel. They are things that we think are new because we haven't heard them before. I'll never forget that I was talking to someone at a time and when I was on the Moody Bible radio network, and I thought, at least in my knowledge, there had never been an African-American broadcasting other than Tony Evans on Moody Bible Institute, when someone informed me, oh yeah, years and years ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago, there was another African-American. There's nothing new under the sun. Verse number 10 says, is there anything that is new? Check it out. You will find out that it existed for years. Many of the new thoughts in psychology are extensions of theories that were proposed years earlier. Are there any new movie plots? I know we're not going to the movies right now, but maybe we're watching movies at home. The movies that we watch are simply twists of the same old plots that have been used for years and years. There is nothing new under the sun. In verse 11, even when worthwhile things are accomplished, they are soon forgotten. This is a very depressing situation. It didn't just start today. This isn't the first time people have experienced monotony or depression or meaninglessness. And so we have it here cataloged for us, recorded in the inscripturated writings of the Word of God. We can see that the restless, ceaseless activity of the sun, the wind, the rivers, and even people, and all of human existence, when lived apart from God, is frustrating and unsatisfactory. All of the pleasures and material things of life, when sought for their own sake, bring nothing but unhappiness ultimately and a sense of futility. It raises a question. How did we get here? How did people arrive at such a monotonous, frustrating way of life? Did God plan it this way? Let me be the first to say no. We are where we are because we have sinned against God and rejected his plan for us. Adam and Eve sinned against God and plunged humanity into this situation. God created us to be relationally and vocationally fulfilled, but we rejected that plan. As a result, all of creation groans and travails until Jesus shall come and rescue us from our own doing. If I had time tonight, and I don't, I could talk about how that humanity will be redeemed. And the Bible tells us that all of creation was subjected to futility until the manifestations of the sons of God, because God didn't want a fallen humanity with a pristine creation. And so he subjected creation to futility, that one day humanity would be redeemed, but creation would be restored. You see, humanity sinned and needs to be redeemed from that sin and forgiven. But creation did not sin. It was subjected to futility, and therefore one day it will be restored. All of this has taken place because of the sin of people. If that's the case, then where do we go from here? We have a deep longing for relationship. We have a deep longing for significance. Dr. Larry Crabb said that we long for someone to see us as we really are and to still love us. We also long to count and to make a difference in this world. We go back and we want to go back to where we are. We want to try to probably get back to before the fall. And I believe, along with Dr. Crabb, that we had both relationship and significance before the fall. We were loved by God, and our needs were fully met by our mate and God, and we had the significance of protecting and producing from the Garden of Eden. So how do we get there? Solomon sums up his examples of futility and states a conclusion to the whole section and the whole matter in Ecclesiastes 2:24 through 26. Here he gives a conclusion and a cure to the meaninglessness that is produced by monotony and the cycles of life. It is interesting to note that Solomon's treatment for the problem is biblical therapy. He's using reality therapy, not Glasser's reality therapy. He's using God's reality therapy. We must come to see things as they really are. That is from God's perspective in his word. Notice with me, please, if you will, or I'll read for you, Ecclesiastes 2:24 through 26. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. Let's quickly distill the conclusion down here into several principles before I let you go. Principle number 1 is in verse 24. Accept God's perspective concerning his providences. The possession of blessings and the goods of life is a gift from God. All good things must be received and understood as coming from the hand of God if they are to be used properly, if they are to be used joyfully. The principle is be content with and enjoy the providences of God. Realize that they are not ends in themselves. Life is more than what you have. In other words, you need to thank God and be content and learn to enjoy the things that God has provided you. Principle number 2, verse 25. All the processes and things of life are due to the providence of God. Without God, you'd be unable to breathe, to eat, to drink, to carry on any other routine functions of life. Our very existence is dependent upon the sovereignty of Christ, of God and Christ. Andre Crouch summed it up perfectly when he said, all that I am and ever hope to be, I owe it all to thee. Therefore, not only should we be content and enjoy what God has done, we ought to have an attitude of thankfulness in order to avoid the meaningless. When you understand that there is a God of purpose who has created you and given you purpose, and then given you all of these wonderful gifts for a purpose, it ought to bring thanksgiving into our hearts, into our souls, out of our mouths in praise and in worship for what God has done for us. Thanksgiving will transform meaninglessness into meaningfulness. Thanksgiving will change your attitude and your altitude and raise you to a higher level of living. Principle number 3, and I'll let you go. Verse 25. Purpose in life and consequently enjoyment from the things of life comes from God. God alone, not things, not wisdom, is the giver of satisfaction and the giver of joy. We are preoccupied with the gifts and we've neglected the giver. God gives us gifts, but it is our relationship with him that makes the gifts enjoyable, not the gifts in and of themselves. Men and women definitely do not have it within their ability to extract enjoyment from life or from any of the mundane functions such as eating or drinking or earning a paycheck. Only God can give the ability to those who come to him in belief. He will give them the ability to enjoy the things that he has bestowed upon us. It takes a personal relationship with God to come to understand what life is really all about and thereby begin to experience the abundant life. I'm preaching right now and I'm theologizing for the people of the world who are struggling deeply with despair. Suicide is up among millennials, but suicide is also up among middle agers, about 30. That people are having a hard time coming to some understanding of what the meaning of life is, what their purpose is for being on the earth. And therefore, the cultural anxiety, that's what I'm calling this series, cultural anxieties. The cultural anxiety of meaninglessness and of emptiness is the cultural anxiety of this particular cultural dispensation. But they are met in a complex and dynamic relationship with God. I said complex. I said dynamic. I didn't say simple. I'm not talking about simplism. Simple is that, God is the answer to all of our problems. God is that you can trumpet that, you can preach it, but modern people are not accepting it without question, because they got eyes and they look around. They have TV and they watch it. They think and they see things that are going on. They are aware of their experience, and they are aware that there's darkness on the earth. There's trouble upon the earth. There is racial injustice going on. There is a pandemic that's happening. And yet we're saying everything's going to be all right. Like there's nothing to go through. Oh, there's something to go through. There's some struggle. There's some troubles. There's some issues that are going on. But we don't have a simplistic God who simply answers our trouble without any kind struggle. Matter of fact, he came and interjected himself into our lives and into our struggle. He came all the way from heaven down. Dr. Hall said he didn't come halfway. He came all the way. He came all the way into humanity, all the way, and accepted the struggles that we have that took him all the way to the cross. What we're trying to preach today, what we're trying to help people come to understand today is that it doesn't mean there's not going to be any trouble in your life. That if you accept Jesus, it doesn't mean it won't be any struggle. Doesn't mean it won't be any darkness. But what it does mean is there's a nevertheless in your situation. That I might be struggling with the coronavirus right now in terms of the stay-at-home order and shelter in place. But nevertheless, I have a joy in the midst of that struggle, a joy in the midst of that unrest. I have peace in the midst of that unrest. Nevertheless, I have a joy, I have a peace, I have a comfort, I have a goal. There is a meaning to my life. Nevertheless, in the face of what's going on, I have faith, but it came from the struggle of doubt. I have hope, but it came from the struggle of despair. I have all that God wants me to have. I have love, but that love comes out of conflict. It comes out of difficulty, struggling with hate. That I have a nevertheless, that I have these things in spite of the fact that the devil is fighting me, in spite of the fact that there are difficult circumstances, in spite of the fact that there are all of these things. Trust in God does not alleviate difficulties, but provides a nevertheless in the midst of our difficulties. I want you to be able to walk forward in life looking at the struggles and be able to say, nevertheless. When you are down and having a lot of difficulty and perhaps you are depressed, maybe you've got PTSD symptoms, maybe you are in despair, you can say, nevertheless. Nevertheless, there is a hope in Jesus Christ. Thanks for tuning in this evening. I hope I'm beginning to touch upon where you are and to provide biblical resources, spiritual resources, emotional resources for you to be able to walk out the meaningful, wonderful, purposeful life that God has for you. Have a great evening. I'll see you Sunday morning if you're a member of the house of the Lord, or next Wednesday or the following Thursday as we work our way through this series. Have a great evening.